Class is now in session. I'm Professor Hockey, and today we will be recapping Day 3 of the third round of the Stanley Cup playoffs. And on this day, it would be Game 2 between the Golden Knights and the Stars. The Golden Knights looking to even up this series at 1, and that's exactly what they would manage to do with a shutout of their own, just like the Stars did in Game 1, this time by a score of 3-0. So finally, even after a scoreless first period, the Golden Knights managed to get a goal, and it was actually from a forward, so this was the first time in over 4 straight games. I think there was a stat of about 270 plus minutes for the Golden Knights without a goal on a manned net from a forward. Stastny finally breaks that trend with this one. Then it'll be William Karlsson adding to it on the power play, and then eventually Tomas Nosek getting a third for the Golden Knights. That would all come goal scoring in the second period. The Stars would never really have anything to respond to that, and so they'd end up losing it 3-0. Good news for the Golden Knights was it was a great bounce back game. After a game in which they were pretty much, you could say, outplayed by the Dallas Stars, they looked significantly better here tonight. Their offense finally showing up here. 3 goals is not a ton, but it was absolutely enough, and it's certainly a good start. It was pretty obvious that even after 4 straight games with the Golden Knights just not really getting any goal scoring, it wasn't that all of a sudden the goal scoring had disappeared for this team, and it was more so just obvious that it was some sort of dry spell. Now the worry, of course, was that that dry spell would last a bit too long, and at a point where it would run out, it might be a bit too late. But luckily for the Golden Knights, it only lasts here up until Game 2, at least as it seems. And so the Golden Knights probably will get back to their scoring ways. 3+ goals maybe to be expected on most nights. It should also be mentioned that the defense was also very solid here for the Golden Knights, and in the goaltending department, Robin Lehner was put back between the pipes over Marc-Andre Fleury. Not really a surprise to anyone. Lehner has been the starter for the Golden Knights, and while Fleury has played occasionally and has looked good in those games, it's pretty clear Lehner is the number one guy, and he puts up another shutout here. This is his 4th of these playoffs, and of course 4 shutouts in a playoff seems insane, but you do have to keep it in a bit of context that 3 of those were against the Canucks, and in those 3 Canucks games, the Canucks just looked really bad. The Golden Knights just clearly outmatching them, and so maybe Robin Lehner's workload in those shutouts were not necessarily massive, and so I don't think Lehner is some sort of insane goaltender through these playoffs, but he's absolutely one of the top goaltenders left. You could probably put him at a similar level of where Vasilevsky is for the Tampa Bay Lightning, definitely a top 2 goaltender at the moment, but just to sort of temper expectations, he's definitely not unbeatable in this series. In terms of bad news for the Golden Knights, well, it's kind of hard to find much. This was actually just a very well-played game from them. The offense was solid, the defense was solid, the goaltending was solid, just all throughout, decent depth. They got a power play goal. They were pretty well disciplined. They got a goal from, a top 6 forward, I guess you could say. You could call Paul Stastny a top 6 forward. They got a goal from a bottom 6 forward from Tomas Nosek. So yes, you could still mention that Marchessault, Smith, Stone not really getting on the board, and even at even strength, you could add someone like William Karlsson to that, but this was a decent start for them anyhow. On to the Dallas Stars side, the good news for them is that the things that were good in Game 1 remained pretty solid. The major problem for the Stars in this game is that it just felt as though in Game 1 they outplayed the Golden Knights because the Golden Knights didn't play all that well, but in Game 2 the Golden Knights brought their A game and the Stars just couldn't really match it all that well here in Game 2. Khudobin was still pretty solid. The defense was still pretty active and pretty decent as well, but that brings us to the big bad news for the Dallas Stars, which is the offense. They scored only a single goal in Game 1. It was actually enough to win that game, but it's certainly not a way to win most games with just a single goal, and here tonight they get shut out, and so now this is becoming a bit of a problem here. The Dallas Stars having issues scoring against a team that actually has a fully healthy defense and goaltending unit, unlike the Colorado Avalanche back in round 2, so someone here is going to have to step up, and I think my eyes at the moment for the Stars have to be on Tyler Seguin. He's one of the top offensive players, or he should be one of the top offensive players for the Dallas Stars. On paper, probably their best, if not second best forward on this team, and yet he's been mostly non-existent on a lot of these games for the Dallas Stars. Players like Pavelski, Gurianov, Jamie Benn, Alex Radulov, these are all players who, yes, at times have looked quite spotty. They've gone maybe a few game stretches where they haven't really been doing much, but they've all also had big moments where they were effective players for the Dallas Stars. Seguin hasn't really had any of that throughout the entirety of these playoffs, just 2 goals in the 18 games that he has played, to go along with just 5 assists. 7 points for a player making this much money as a top player on this team is just not really enough to get the job done. So I'm looking at Tyler Seguin here for the Dallas Stars. It's sort of reminding me of how the Flyers were when they were still in these playoffs, with players like Giroux, Couturier, Voracek not really contributing. And while the Stars don't have their entire top offensive core not doing anything, with Seguin not doing anything, you really need your players to play at 100% if you're going to want to compete with a team like the Golden Knights, and right now the Stars aren't necessarily getting that from their forwards. But that will do it for this recap. In terms of predictions, I had said the Golden Knights would win it in 5 games. This win certainly makes that look a bit better. Do I think the Stars will not take another game in this series? It's probably somewhat unlikely at this point. Do I think the Golden Knights will still be able to win this series, though? I do think that will likely be the case. Class dismissed.